Hello, and welcome back to Grey Wolf Adventuring, where fantasy meets folklore and world building is our sacred craft. Today, I've got something very special. We're talking with a map maker whose ink has charted kingdoms and has carved mountain ranges, the one, the only, Grey Cartographer. Thank you for joining.
Hi. No problem. Thanks for having me.
Whether you're a DM, a writer, a world builder, or just a sucker for a good compass rose, today's conversation will take you deep into the art and soul of fantasy map making. So, Grey Cartographer, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into coastlines and contour lines, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you found your way into the world of fantasy map making.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Grey. I have been doing maps for most of my life now in one form or another. I've kind of always been interested by them, but since I got into D&D it's probably around 2020 COVID time, maybe just before. Since then, it's just been all about fantasy maps and trying to improve my craft for a very long time and trying to get a little bit better every time. And it does feel like it adds a bit more to the story, which is why I like to have them in my world and have them sort of be a part of it mostly for D&D, but for world building generally as well.
Fantastic, yeah. The one thing I know about players is that they love a prop, and I think especially a map can just be really fun to interact with, and also can tell them so much about the world they don't know too much about, especially when it's a homebrew campaign. So let's start very, very wide. What, in your view, makes compelling fantasy world building?
Wow. I think fantasy world building is compelled by not so much like the content, but the passion of the storyteller. I think if you are telling a good story and you haven't actually got that much content, you can flavor it up a lot more just by how passionate you can pass that on. With things like maps and props and generally telling stories, you can have a lot of passion and, I guess, love and emphasis with whatever it is that you're talking about. So I think depending on how you portray it and how you pass it off, I think you can give it a lot of emphasis.
Fantastic, thank you very much for that. And how do you personally balance imagination with real world geographical logic? Where do you see where realism blends, and where do you draw the line?
I struggle sometimes because I was quite a big geography nerd. I used to read maps and stuff as a kid. Like I used to go out on you've heard the Duke of Edinburgh Award?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So I did my gold Duke of Edinburgh. So a lot of that is map reading and like sort of looking at stuff. And I draw a lot of inspiration from real world maps as well. So I find it difficult sometimes to blend how sort of fantasy maps would be and real maps. I try and draw continents and mountain ranges where they would normally be on a map, on fault lines and things like that. But then it's only after that then I start to put in things like, right, this just looks like a world map. Now let's make it a little bit more fantasy. Where's the castles? Where's the storms and that kind of thing? So I try and get the skeleton of the world first, where it looks like a real place, and then chuck some fantasy sprinklings on top of that.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Do you think that maps can purely be practical for the story, or do you think they can be poetic in themselves, do you find?
I think a little bit of both. I do find that maps can be useful for players and for if you're adding them to a book, for example. But also, I think it can provide storytelling in itself. Maps in this day and age and in the past can be biased. They can be of a certain perspective. They can be written by someone. There is obviously a cartographer who has made that, and so why have they made that? And there's a story behind that as well, so which can be reflected in how it's drawn.
That's so interesting you said that. Yeah, I never really thought about it, but obviously maps, like any kind of information, have their own biases depending on who's created them. I think it's the perfect example, isn't it, with the map we see of the world today. It's either a happy coincidence or something that has been subtly decided upon that makes Europe more pronounced.
Mm-hmm. And the UK and England smack bang in the middle at the Greenwich Mean Time.
Or that's the funny thing as well, isn't it? Like, but when you see a map, a world map that is made to be used in the United States, they put the US in the middle, even though that makes arguably even less sense than than Europe. Fascinating. Yeah. That's something that is actually I never really thought about, because that says so much about the storytelling and like the politics and factions in a world that you just take for granted.
Yeah, there is a little bit, like I've had my friend blue haired DM, you might have seen him about. So he asked for a map of the fire plane, and specifically around the city of Brass. And I was thinking, oh, I could do that. That sounds really, really good. And then it was difficult. Like, who is this map for? Who wants a map of the city of Brass? And like, the people and the inhabitants who live there just know their way around, or it's an endless plain. It's like, I can't really map it, but I did it because it was fun. And it's that suspension of disbelief as well. It's more spatial awareness for the players to understand that you're here, this is where you're trying to get to, and that. So it's in the same way that when you watch a movie, there is music and very good lighting and you can see everything, whereas actually it would be very dark and there would be no music and lots of screaming if there was a big battle, that kind of thing.
Fantastic. They're so interesting. Yeah, so on that note then, have you ever found that you use geography to lead your world building, or is it kind of primarily led by cultures and stories and cataclysms that have arisen?
Oh, great question. So a little bit of both. I've actually got a picture, a map recently to show. Here we go. So here is it. This is work in progress. So this is a map currently. I'll bring it a little bit closer in a second. So this is where I'm currently working on, and we started off with a game called The Quiet Year, and it's a little bit of a map making game where you sort of make it as a team. Draw cards and things happen, and from that a lot of things happened with the players around the table, but they didn't know I was going to make that into what would be our campaign. And this kind of bit in the center where there's a big crater used to be a very large monastery, and there's a big storm here, and there's things that have came from stories which have then turned into paths from a map. But then other times I have made just thrown some rice or some things on a map, drawn a little circle around it and a squiggly line, and then from that I've made an island or I've made a continent. And so it can depend. Sometimes I really want to make a sort of jungle inspired culture, so or like in a bit like yourself, you've got that pirate themed sort of swashbuckling adventure. So I want to do Caribbean style. So I want to do the islands a bit more like a naval map, because that's what it is. And I've got one that's a little bit similar to that. It's painstaking trying to get all the lines on it, but that's another form of inspiration that it came from, and it had a really good effect. But yeah, I think it can just come from anywhere really.
Yeah, lovely. That's what I found difficult to find a good medium between, because like you said, using rice, or even like, we both love D&D, rolling dice, having them dictate certain areas or landscapes or coastlines or whatever. I like that idea because obviously it creates randomness, which is what coastlines generally are. They aren't straight lines a lot of the time. But then if you were to say, okay, well, all the blue dice here represent volcanoes, but then they're scattered randomly, like you said, mountains form on fault lines, or like are pushed up with fault lines and whatnot. And so it's like, when you have something that is purely random, then it starts to not look as real and as approachable. But then at the same time, that can inspire fantasy elements.
Exactly. It's then being able to come up with your own reasons why it is outside of the conventional real world sort of likeness, if you like. So that's the sort of naval couple of islands.
Absolutely gorgeous.
That's still work in progress as well, because that's all pencil. But the island chain itself is obviously, that's a mountain line, a ridge line, and that's the only part that we can see. So that's another way that you can inspire sort of realism, but also feed it into the fantasy part.
Fantastic, yeah. So considering we're talking about the creative process, what does yours look like? How do you bring a blank page to what you would regard as a finished map?
That is a great question. When I find out, I will tell you. But
yeah,
thank you. Most of the time, it can be, it ebbs and flows like any sort of creative outlet. I can go for weeks and weeks without even thinking about doing maps, and then there's other times where I'm like, I really fancy adding to this. Or sometimes I'll start with something quite large, maybe like a continent or even a world. But I've only ever done a world once. I found it a bit too sparse, a bit overwhelming, not enough detail. So I've kind of kept to continents and subcontinents, where it's like where most of my story is going to take place, and kind of left the outside as to sort of everybody else to help me build. And then from that I'll take parts. So if I'm feeling like, I really want to, I've seen something on TikTok where I'd say, I'm inspired by a desert culture or anything that's history related as well. I sometimes get pinged by. There was one that was, here is how air conditioning is done in the ancient times, and we're like, that's really interesting. Roman concrete. And I'm like, wow, I'm such a nerd. And it's like, when you look at these kind of things, you're like, right, how did that work? And then how would I apply that to fantasy? And what would that look like on a map? And if there was a whole culture related to it. So my inspiration and my creative process comes from lots of different places. But
yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, because obviously, like, the only thing when you said air conditioning, immediately I thought of was like the design of a mosque. So it's designed for a particular reason, and that's because it creates airflow.
Exactly.
And the same thing with the elevated floors of like Roman buildings as well.
Absolutely.
It's things that we don't ever think about, do we? But it's like, like I said, deep nerddom. Massive history fan myself. So it's like, I feel very seen right now.
Good.
When you're just speaking about like difficulty with scale there with creating a world map, so how do you approach scale generally? Do you avoid the trap of maps that is like too empty or particularly too overcrowded? Like, how do you find a happy medium there?
A little bit. So I'll show you some of my early work, because I've obviously been through a process of trying to figure it out. So this is where I kind of first started in pencil, as most people did, and then I bought some fancy pens, and suddenly I got a little bit better. So because tools definitely help. So it's this starting on a continent, and because it is on pencil, it is a bit wide. Like, there's not much detail there. I did have story for it, but it felt as empty as it looked. So then I started going a little bit closer. So like, here is a country with some, like, a couple of other places around and some rememberable names that you could probably see from that one. And that felt a little bit better because that's more relatable. I know that my character is from Daggerford, for example, and it takes about a day to get to here. And you kind of like see the lines on the map, you see the countries, you see like the conflicts and the policies, and a lot of more more mortal stories, if you like. When you go on the macro scale, it just goes like mortals, and when you get a little bit lower, I think stories come from people. and I think that's when you can start interacting on a little bit closer scale. That's why I like doing cities as well. They're a little bit more complicated and very time consuming, but there's so many more communities and sub-communities and rich and poor divides and lots of different things that you can play with just in a very small space. You could run a campaign just based on one city, and you could have so much just based on that. And you could have a map, you might not even need one, but something like that, it might be a little bit more interesting.
That's so interesting you say that, yeah, because with the campaign that I'm trying to create at the moment, it has inspired itself over and over and over again. Because all of a sudden I've realised, oh well, if I've got this element, then I probably should add this and this and this, and something that was, I described an entire settlement in 3 paragraphs, and now it's 3 full quests and about 3 or 4 pages of all the different elements of. Oh yeah, and also then I need an NPC table. Then I need I need random settlement encounters, even though I've already created random wilderness encounters as well. So it's been it's so enjoyable, isn't it, to kind of like chase this rabbit of like how much detail do I give this?
It is, and I think that's one of the things early days of DMing I struggled with a lot, is that, well, I need to have all these things prepared just in case, and I found it often went to waste, or like I would find that I would use it somewhere else, but eventually, because as you learn as a DM, I'm going to recycle some material, reskin it, and put it somewhere else. But yeah, I found that I enjoyed that process just as much as I enjoyed like just DMing and generally being part of the game. Just to go, I love creating this idea and a small concept of like a certain shopkeeper or a certain like community, and I want to put that into my next house or my next sort of world or whatever it is.
With me personally, one thing, kind of creating that kind of depth, it gives me confidence when I'm DMing, because if the players ask something completely random, I've got some tangential thing I can kind of lean on, and then and also, like you said, you can always reuse it, reskin it, do whatever, and it helps, like I say, bring depth to that situation, whatever, because because the players, they are ultimately just absolute chaos junkies, but that's why collaborative storytelling is incredible. Before we get too off topic though, I do have one last question. So obviously nowadays most people generally play D&D online, so obviously that frequents using digital tools. Do you use digital tools, or are you mainly pen and pencil? Or
yeah, I'm mainly physical maps, and because that's what I really enjoy doing. I'm not against the digital maps. I've used them a little bit in the past, but haven't really done much myself. I have seen some really good ones being used though. Obviously there's a lot of free tools out there, but if you're willing to pay, I think you can get some good, like really, really decent ones. Same with battle maps and city maps and stuff. So I think I do like having the freedom to run my hand over the paper, and that is now correct. That is now canon, and that's whatever it is. I don't know. I like the physical feel of having it, and that prop where you hand it over. But I'm predominantly an in-person DM.
Oh, lovely.
But yeah.
I think that's it's the difficult things, like what you're saying earlier. It's like, at what point is too much detail? So like, the whole point of the map, like you said, is an approximation. Especially something like a battle map as well. It's like, it is literally there just so you can, especially when you use a digital tool, it's there to check how much fireball will engulf these people, or how far you can run in a particular turn. But there comes a point where a battle map is like I think you might have seen, like, it becomes too detailed. I think on Roll20 now you can it's coded so you can see what your character can see. So it is shaded in certain elements. And obviously just it's coded in saying this is a building, so this is what you will be able to see from your viewpoint out of this window. And at that point, it's like, I mean, obviously it's a paid product, so that's why they're doing it, because you all of a sudden you've got this so much more complexity to it, but at the same time it can become a bit unnecessary. Let's say that. I think what you're trying to do and what a digital tool is trying to do is two completely different things.
Yeah, I think that does add a little bit in. If your campaign is a dungeon crawl and that's basically what you're doing, then that's probably going to be good. But if you're looking for a bit more free and role play and just like generally like looking a bit, and I kind of apply that same that sprinkle of detail to my maps as well. So like here is a very detailed map of a city. Now that is incredibly complicated, and I don't have the contents for every single one of those buildings. I don't know who lives in each one. I've got a rough idea, but it's like the same if you had a character who said they came from Scotland. You're not expected to know the entirety of the history of Scotland. It's just like, here's a general idea of what's going on. Away you go. So I think it's good to have a rough idea. Like you say, it gives you that confidence as a DM to know, in that area I know what it is, I can add a little bit. And it's very good if you can ad-lib and sort of improvise a little bit, but having a rough idea of what's going on in each area is pretty good.
Lovely. And talking about kind of story-led inspiration, so how do you use maps to tell stories rather than just as a tool to support them?
That's probably a really good question. So that's part of it is it is a, rather than just a supplement to a story, it does tell the story as well. I going back to that bias that I was talking about before, like who's created a map, but it's also a photograph. It's a snapshot in time. It's at this time, this is what the world looks like. And the campaign that I'm currently doing is a brand new world. So they are only just discovering certain parts of the land, and it's very sparse, and the map is unfilled. So every time they go into a new area, they can spend time to create a map, and we can do it together. We can sort of like add little bits onto it, and they're really enjoying creating part of that world, almost like having a render distance, if you like, when you're moving into a new area. So yeah, I think that's a collaborative way to sort of bring maps into the storytelling as well.
On that note then, actually, are there any strange or obscure details you've added in any of your maps previously or plan to?
Yes. So there was at one point where I was doing a TikTok live, and I was taking suggestions of whatever people want me to put in, because this was for my campaign, and I managed to sneak in a reverse mermaid. So it was the head of a fish and the legs of a man, just kind of like
that
in
is
the
inspired.
sea. So
I'm keeping that. I'm going to jot that down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's not a looker.
No, I'll send you a picture. It took a while for the players to notice, but when they did find it, they were like, "What?"
Yeah. Hey, she's beautiful to me. Interesting. Cool. So, going on to kind of inspiration and legacy. What real-world maps, periods of history, or cultures generally influence your work?
Wow. Well, I've actually got a couple of things here. So there's some like old vellum maps.
That's and gorgeous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of like the way it's constructed and what it's on. Again, we were talking about bias and the perception of the world at certain points. These have obviously been created with that kind of thing in mind. There's Europe during like medieval times and the borders what looked like at that point. And even when it comes to things like, there's the UK, obviously back to front, and it's got like the symbols on the side of like Wessex and Sussex and Northumbria and all that kind of stuff. And so these kind of things inspire me because they're sort of references to, well, this is how we see our world at the moment, without satellite technology and without sort of the granular detail of what we think it is. There's a real life map called the Perry Reese map, which is like rumored to be a copy of one that was from the Library of Alexandria, and all this stuff. And when you look at it, the kind of like the sort of aspects and the ratios of things are off, but you can still see roughly what looks to be the world, and there's symbols on there which are really good to kind of like for people to steer themselves, and that they're kind of like real inspirational maps where you think, again, that's someone's perspective of a certain point in time of the information that they had at the time. So I kind of like to blend that with the way I make maps. It's here is a useful map, but also here is a map of a certain person's perspective.
That's lovely, because you're completely right. It holds a subconscious weight in the real world, and there's absolutely no reason why you can't translate that for your players to use, but also have that kind of tell a story about politics and factions in a fantasy world you've created as well.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely. Is there a particular map of yours that you're really, really proud of, and why?
Oh, I do like that city map that I did before was very complicated and very nice, because it's kind of, there's lots of patterns in there. The more you look, the more patterns you see. There's a D20 in there. There's a D12. That is based off a what's the I can't remember what the shape is called, but there's many circles. Oh, God, what it's called. I'll have to find it and let you know what it was. But that I'm quite proud of, because it was quite complicated and took me quite a long time.
Well, it's impressive just as a work of art, anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And then this is kind of like my standard of map at the minute, which is, it looks quite fantasy. It's quite, I don't want to say Tolkien, but it's more like it's that rough and ready icon kind of mixture between here's black and white icon map, but also a little bit more detail. So I quite like that.
Lovely. Are there any particular dream projects you'd like to work on if budget, time, and sanity wasn't an issue? Are there any worlds you'd like to cartograph?
Wow. I've often thought about copying maps that I've seen. So like Middle Earth, for example, would be a really good one. But also I'd like to do it justice. So there's kind of like there's an element and freedom of creativity when I make my own map. I can do what I want, and it can be whatever shape. When I'm copying a map, it can feel that, I really need to do it like this way, and make sure I get it right, and scale and all that kind of stuff, which can add a little bit of, I guess, anxiety towards it, because I want to do it well. So I think, based on that, I think I've seen there's somebody else on TikTok a while ago, but they had a really big map, and I think I'd like to do like an A1 piece of paper and just go wild with my own creation.
I think it's in I think like the third Pirates of the Caribbean or something. But there's a scene where they're painting a world map on like the whole side of a wall, and ever since I saw that, I was like, I want that.
Yeah, that in my house, please.
Yeah. But like you said, very painstaking. It's really lovely to see how much respect you have for that craft. You know, it's I feel there's kind of a similar way with history and folklore in general as well. It's like you said, it's not just there's so much depth to it. You know, like you said, it tells stories, and it tells you about a particular point in time and the people involved, you know, in that kind of creation. So it's always Yeah, absolutely fascinating to learn a little bit more about, other people's passions and other people's artistry. Okay, we're gonna do a little fun rapid fire round. Okay, so you ready for this?
Okay.
This.
Ready.
We'll see what happens here. So, mountains or forests?
Mountains.
Cities or ruins?
Ruins.
Hex maps or freeform?
Freeform.
And if you could live anywhere in one of your own maps, where would it be?
Oh, great question. Probably the porous plains, where it's just fields and fields and there's nobody around.
Oh, lovely. It's like Mongolia or something.
Yeah, pretty much like that, like a steppe.
Lovely. And what tool can you not live without with map making?
My roll of black pens.
in their lovely
In a lovely little wallet.
That is absolutely fantastic. Now that's
Very
a D&D
useful.
copy if I ever saw one. Fantastic. Well, with that, I've exhausted all my questions for you. I hope you've had fun. Grey Cartographer, thank you so much for lending us your insight and for reminding us that behind every story is a world waiting to be drawn. If you've been watching this and you're feeling the itch to sketch your own world into being, just do it. Start with a single line, a coastline, a river, a mountain range, and let the story follow. Be sure to check out Grey Cartographer's work. Your handle on social media is
Grey Cartographer on YouTube and TikTok.
fantastic. And finally, please make sure to subscribe, share, and as always, stay bold, stay curious, and keep adventuring. This was Grey Wolf Adventuring signing off, and thank you so much again, Grey
No problem.
for hanging out with me. Absolute legend. See you soon, my friend.
See you soon.
Lovely.